Welcome, everybody. Just so excited to have you, Table of the Year. And it's a very exciting one, promises to be very significant in terms of the types of topics we're going to be discussing. We'll be getting into the issues and cultural forces that are shaping this election. And also we'll be getting into some of the implications that the potential outcome of the election will have for businesses, for some of the different industries and different trade associations that are out there. And before we get started, I wanted to thank, over this year, we have had so many people in the Heart+Mind team who have stayed up nights, who've worked weekends, getting data, process things, ready to go and share and present with you. And we just wanted to do a shout out to all of them and thank them from the bottom of our hearts for all the work that they put into that. Also want to thank Aaron, who will be walking us through the data from our most recent tracking, and Maury, who will be facilitating the conversation with our special guests. Thank you, Aaron and Maury, for what you do to prepare for this. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Maury. Maury will kick this off and we'll introduce our special guest for today.
Thank you very much, Dee, and welcome everybody. It's ready to rock and roll. We're all in not only a nonstop reality that's been up and down with COVID, but we also know that the reality of the election and everything associated with it is anything but a normal reality show. And it's our life and everything else related to our business and everything that influences us. So today we're going to dive in and talk at length about what's coming up here and what are some of the thoughts. You all are going to participate a lot. We've got a number of questions we're going to ask you, so get ready for that. I do want to quickly introduce Joel Oxely and Craig Schwalb, who run with WTOP, partners that we've been able to participate with, and we appreciate them joining us. They handle all the news business and all the political and commercial advertising. So Joel and Craig, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
And we're also glad to have Mitchell Miller with us today. Mitchell, it looks like you're ready to broadcast a show here, so we appreciate you stepping out and joining us.
In case something happens right away, I'll be ready to go.
There you go. Well, and on that note, before we get into our topic, we actually want to ask you, Mitchell, because you're more than a fly on the wall on something that we all thought was going to be happening right now, but happened, about 4 hours ago with the hearings down on Capitol Hill. Can you just touch on that real quickly? Just give us a quick little sense of what took place if anyone hasn't been tracking.
Sure. So the Senate Judiciary Committee was actually going to vote right at this time related to Judge Amy Coney Barrett, but it's really the prerogative of the chairman of the committee to essentially do what he or she wants. And in this case, once it became clear that Democrats were going to boycott the hearing, they literally did not show up. And then they had pictures, large poster boards of people who are dealing with health issues in connection with their concerns related to the Affordable Care Act and what may happen on November 10th when that case comes up before the High Court. They did that, and so the Judiciary Committee Chairman, Lindsey Graham, he opted to go ahead with the vote under the bylines, not to get too much in the weeds, but technically it does state within the rules that the committee is supposed to have 2 minority members there for any kind of action, but the Senate being the Senate can kind of make rules on the fly, and really ultimately it comes down to whether the chairman wants to move forward, and so he decided to do that. So they voted 12-0 to move confirmation, and that of course tees up the final confirmation vote on Monday night.
Yeah, that was when we saw some of the news coming through this morning, like, wait a minute, thought they were voting later today. That just constant updates on that. And we're going to get into our first topic on the ballot, but Mitchell, I do want to ask you one question, just your take on this and what you're hearing and seeing on the Hill. There's some talk about, does this hearing and this moving forward to the approval of the nomination, does that actually hurt or help Trump in his reelection? Because there's talk about Senator McConnell and others saying, okay, we got done what we need to, and maybe now less supported because of the other issues. Anything you're hearing on the Hill in terms of the impact on the election specifically with this action?
Right, that's a good question. I think if you look at it in terms of the president who has been messaging on a variety of things, here on the Hill, Senate Republicans and House Republicans, for that matter, would like to get a focused message on some of these accomplishments. Senator Cruz, who's a member of the Judiciary Committee, actually said today that he thought that this was the biggest accomplishment of President Trump's entire presidency. So that gives you a sense of what the Republicans here are hoping that this will do, that it will remind people and it will remind his core voters, as well as the base, that this is part of the reason why President Trump was elected and why you should go to the polls and why elections, as they say, matter. On the Democratic side, of course, they're going to take it the other direction and say this was all done at the expense of coronavirus relief and the fact that there's a close to $2 trillion proposal that's sitting out there that's, depending on the hour, either moving forward or not moving forward. So I think overall, to answer your question, I think it does help the president that they got this through right before the election. Obviously, Democrats are going to see it differently and going to be bitter about it. But those that already made their decisions, were going to do that anyway.
Sure. Is there any take, do you think, to the talk about those Republicans in the Senate who obviously could take credit for and pushing forward this would then not overtly abandon Trump, but simply move forward and be okay with the reality where they're in control of the Senate, but they've got someone else in the White House because they got their 3 nominees in? Or do you see any reality to that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is ultimately, for the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, this is the brass ring. This is what he really wants to do. This is what he's here for. So it's been interesting. I was talking with somebody today about the fact that that there has been some distancing of Senate Republicans. Obviously, they're essentially at odds with the president over this $2 trillion package. I think if you drill down a little bit on some of these down ballot races, obviously the Judiciary Committee Chairman, Lindsey Graham's probably in the toughest race he's ever been in South Carolina. And this helps him because he got some free media time over the last week or so. And I think he feels like the hearings were done pretty well and worked for him. You know, there has been some other fallout related to this, by the way. The ranking Democrat, Senator Dianne Feinstein, a lot of more liberal Democrats do not like the fact that she showed this kind of comedy with the chairman at the end of the hearing, that she gave him a hug, that she said some things that a lot of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle say at the end of hearings. But that really upset a lot of people on the left side of the Democratic Party. And so now there's a not so subtle nudge to get her off of that ranking spot on the committee. So these types of things do have fallout. Yeah,
a lot of things going on. And Joe, Craig, we're going to want you to chime in on that. But let's get right into our first topic with the data related to all this on the election. And we're going to share with you our latest ballot numbers. But as you'll notice, I pushed out your way some information about specifically asking you about the poll, a poll about what you think is going to happen in relation to the president in terms of who's going to win, et cetera. So if you can quickly do that, quickly answer that if you haven't already. And in about 10 seconds, I'm going to close that. And then we're asking that, because as has been brought up, it's not just the White House, but in terms of the control of Congress, which is going to make a big difference here. So about 5 seconds left. We'll close this for now and see what this group thinks overall. Okay, so close that here. As a group, we'll share this with you here, and then Aaron, turn it over to you. So basically 70% believing that Biden and Harris are going to win, but a very slight majority of you feeling like Democrats might take the Senate, but it's pretty split. So Aaron, let me turn it to you.
Thanks, Mari. So I'll jump right into it. We'll start with some of the data on the ballot test and pieces related to the election, and then we'll talk about that for a little bit and then dive deeper into the issues. So this week, and our data was collected on October 14th and 15th for this wave, we are seeing a widening of the race, which for polls conducted around the same time was common. So we now have Biden at 48% and Trump at 38%. Those figures do include people who have already voted. So something that we were careful to do in our study, which has not been replicated everywhere else, is we split folks into likely to vote and already voted, and we looked at those numbers separately. Among people who say they have already voted, those voters are breaking for Biden at 3-to-1. So 65% of people who voted early, who say they have already voted, as of the middle of October, voted for Biden. Less than a quarter had voted for Trump. Now, what this does when we look at likely voters, both people who say they will definitely vote and those who say definitely and probably, and that's the difference between the two charts you're looking at on the screen now, that gives Trump an edge on election day because so many of Biden's supporters are coming out early. There's a lot that can go wrong in that situation. We know that things like weather and other events can impact who turns out on election day. So the fact that it's so disproportionate at this point could end up being a big problem for President Trump. And then in terms of who Americans think will win the race, Biden has gotten an edge compared to the last month and a half, 2 months or so. He's pulled ahead. So now 44% of Americans think he's going to win compared to 38%. Which is pretty different from the numbers that you just put up from the internal poll, Maury. When we look at the reason why people are voting, we've been asking this question for a couple of waves now. And when we started, Trump was winning by a fairly significant amount in the first category of I am voting for President Trump. So his voters were much more likely to say that. Biden's voters were much more likely to say that they were voting against Trump by casting a ballot for him. And now, 2 weeks ago, that completely leveled out so that voters were equally likely to say they were voting for their candidate, regardless of whether they were voting for President Trump or Joe Biden. And now Biden actually has the advantage there. So there's definitely, in that regard, I don't want to say less enthusiasm for Trump because Trump still has an edge in enthusiasm, but voters aren't as excited as they were. The flip side of that is that Trump won in 2016 largely by getting votes against Hillary. So this puts him a little bit on more familiar ground, although the difference is still slight at this point. I won't spend too much time on this. We pulled the Real Clear Politics averages from a couple days ago and contrasted them to a similar time period in 2016, just to kind of show that even though the race looks in polling like Biden has a pretty significant edge, this is familiar territory and it will really come down to the states and the Electoral College. So we put together a map of the Electoral College, and I will preface this by saying that this is the probably most favorable map to Trump that we could have put up. Most of the maps that were listed on 270 to win that were done by Politico and Cook Political Report and some of the other big names and predictions all had Biden coming out of the Electoral College in a pretty big landslide. We were looking in like the 320s, 330s. And so just to keep it interesting, we went with sort of the most toss-up map we could to show what's in play. And so, Mari, at that point, maybe that's a good point to stop and kind of open it up to questions in the WTOP team.
Yeah, let me start. Joel, let me ask you to start on this. With so many Democrats voting early, how big will this gap get, and what does this mean in terms of what to be looking for on election night?
Well, to me, there's just so many questions, and Aaron said it. We're in familiar territory here. This is very reminiscent of 4 years ago, where I would guess if you had the maps I remember from 4 years ago looked just like this, with Trump not winning. And so, there's just a lot of questions now, I think, about polls in general. And I wanted to get your all's response on that because now you look at any number of polls and you see some with some really pretty small sample sizes and then pretty large margins for error. And the polls seem to, a lot of the polls are produced by some of the more Biden favorable media. So it seems that there is some bias within some of the polling as well. So it's curious as to your all's thoughts on, is this going to play out a lot closer than we thought, just like it did 4 years ago? Or, is there more reliability built into a lot of the polls that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I'll respond real quickly. And Aaron, you want to add to that? I mean, the biggest challenge 4 years ago was the state level polls with the infrequency of them, the small sample size, and the rigor. And so a lot of the electoral predictions at the state level were dramatically off. I know there's been a lot more happen this year to try to enhance that. But again, the motivation, the incentive to get those state level polls at the level that they need to be still doesn't sit at the high level. So that's still a question mark in my mind. The other dynamic that's dramatically different this time is just the sheer volume of early voting. I think last estimate's over 30 million people have already voted. If that's right, somewhere in the 25 to 30. So Aaron, any take on that on the polls on your side?
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking at it, and it's hard to see where anything has been done significantly differently to 2016, at least on the face. I'm sure changes have been made. The one that keeps catching my eye, and I forget the name of the guy that's running it over there at Trafalgar, and he's doing all state-based polling, and he's predicting a Trump win, which he did in 2016. Now he's definitely a right of center pollster. He works on Republican campaigns. So you have to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. But to me, if you look at what he's doing, he kind of details, we're using multiple methodologies, it's a unique approach compared to what else is out there. And part of me thinks, well, maybe there's something to that. He was right in 2016. And then another part of me thinks 2016 was a weird year. You could develop a method that was dead on in 2016 and it could never work again because it's all a little weird. So, I mean, I think believing that Biden has it locked at this point is probably a dangerous assumption. But I would not hazard a guess as to which way it's actually going to go. I don't feel like I know.
Yeah, another thing is
if I could,
that we're trying to track as well is, does this mean that with all these other options of being able to vote, I mean, so many people now can, I'll be mailing in my vote. Does that mean we're going to have much larger voter turnout? And if the percentages are way up, if just a lot more volume of people actually vote overall, does that mean, who does that favor? And that's something a little bit hard to figure out.
That's, Mitchell, Craig, jump in on this because I think that's one of the big things you're hitting on, Joel, is the turnout. It's always about turnout, but this is a really weird turnout because it's massive right now with a certain group of people, predominantly Democrats, that are voting early more than Republicans in all the survey data showing, and it's large numbers. But then everyone's expecting massive turnout on election day because of all the passion associated with that. Mitchell, Craig, thoughts from your perspective as to who does that favor in terms of getting to who's going to win and thinking about what to look for on election day as to what might happen?
Well, it's interesting because I was just looking at some polling the other day. I don't know if it was Monmouth or one of those, and maybe you all could relate to this, but I was looking at a poll. They had some polling that showed what would happen if there was quote unquote higher turnout, and then what would happen if there was lower than expected turnout, and how that would affect both of the candidates. And what was interesting is it didn't have a huge change. Like I think this was just an individual state, and I can't remember which one, but you would think that there would be a bigger difference. I would have thought if there was a large turnout, I thought it might favor Biden more. But then when they showed when there could be a lower turnout, the numbers were actually pretty similar. And I guess part of the reasoning for that was, well, maybe that would favor Biden because people just don't show up as much in person because this election seems like it's going to be in some ways an outlier because of all these different factors. One thing related to the electoral map that you just showed, it's interesting. I was actually messing around with this map earlier this week. And I mean, just by plugging in some stuff, when I looked at polling in some of the states where it's within the margin of error, if you were to give, like this, as you point out, is pretty favorable to Trump. But if you took Florida, which is now basically within the margin of error, if you took North Carolina, which is within the margin of error, Arizona maybe, and then when I plugged it all in, believe it or not, this is probably a scary thing for the country, it came out to 269, 269.
Yeah, I got that one too.
Yeah, can you imagine that one? Now, the one thing that I did throw in there that helped Trump was I had him taking Wisconsin. As you all know, the polls show that Biden's roughly up, 7 or 8 points there. I happen to think that the polling in Wisconsin, I don't really, for whatever reason, I don't trust it as much. I think it's tighter than that in Wisconsin. I'm originally from Michigan. The numbers have been somewhat similar there. I think Biden is a little more comfortable there in Michigan, but it just goes to show you, I mean, with just a few states, and that's not even throwing in Pennsylvania, which I think a lot of us would agree is going to be a key state. But it does show that Trump could get to 269 even without Pennsylvania if a lot of other things fell his way.
Well, let's keep going on this. And Craig, I want to get to you. But let's talk about the two candidates from a perspective of leadership traits. I pushed out a poll. There's 2 questions. One is, which of these do you think, before you show them this, Aaron, don't show them yet.
Sorry.
Where do you think Americans give Trump the lead on one of these? And which ones do you think under Biden, do you think Americans give him the advantage? You could check 1, 2, 3, or none. Give you about 10 more seconds on that. Just want to see how you all are seeing this, of the way you're seeing the marketplace, because leadership attributes matter. And there's a lot more chaos going on with all of this, but there's an interesting dynamic that Aaron's going to walk you through on the leadership traits that we want to try to make sense of. What does this really mean in terms of differentiation when we have such a tight race? Okay, so I'm going to close this out and share these. 3, 2, 1. Make sure you've done yours. Here we go. Oh, I got a bunch more coming in. Hold on. Let me just give it 1 second. All right. Okay, we'll go right there and we'll share these. So Aaron's going to take us through what we found, but most of you, the highest one for Trump was gets things done that you all think, plus strong leader. We had some of you mention a few others. Honest and trustworthy for Biden, and understand and shared values. So Aaron, take it away.
So I mean, that's pretty much on target. So we asked this question of Americans, but we set up the question a little bit differently in our survey. We asked people for those same 6 leadership traits to pick who was better described by that, and they could pick neither, and they could pick both. We didn't show both here because very few people picked both. But the attribute that Trump does the best on is can get things done, which is the 5th one here, but he's still behind Biden on that. He's behind Biden on all 6 of these leadership traits. Biden is pretty even across the board. There's 1, maybe 2 points different depending on the attribute. Trump is there's a little bit more variability, with getting things done being his strong point and being honest and trustworthy being his low point. And then at the top of the slide, you can see we broke this out by people who said they were going to vote for Trump or Biden. And so there are places where Trump supporters are a little bit more enthusiastic about their candidate's abilities, and places where Biden voters are more enthusiastic about their abilities. So, for example, Biden voters are much more likely than the average American to think that Biden is better described as the candidate who can get things done. But for Trump voters, that's where they believe their candidate shines. So that's a difference of 87% to 75%. And there are some differences like that across the board. But really overall, Biden is seen as the candidate with better leadership skills. Pew actually asked a couple of these questions around the midterms in 2018. And so we pulled that data. And it's really interesting that there's been almost no change over the last 2 years. So for whatever good or bad Trump has done, related to COVID, related to governing, Supreme Court, kind of all of the things that have happened in the last 2 years, the way people see him as a leader, Democrats are more negative than they were 2 years ago, but Republicans are completely unmoved. So we thought that was interesting and worth pointing out. The other thing we looked at was some data that Ipsos released a few days ago, I think, and they put together kind of a similar analysis based on different characteristics that would pull people toward the characteristics that pull people towards Trump, towards Biden, and the ones that push people away. And so what you see here kind of echoes our data, is that Trump, he's bolder. And so where he chooses to engage, he seems more effective. But the flip side of that is that he engages in a fairly negative way. And so the push from Trump, you get corrupt, reckless, racist, bully, liar. Joe Biden, on the other hand, is just seen as kind of bland. He's likable, he's trustworthy, he can do the job. But the kind of same things that make him appealing, in that he's not, I think, as we said at the beginning of the session when people were coming on, a reality show to watch, are the things that push him away. He's older, he's a little boring, feels kind of irresponsible. So we liked this analysis from Ipsos and wanted to weave that into the data we shared today.
So let me ask you, sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Craig, let me ask you this, jump in on this. If Biden's leading by such a significant amount on the head-to-head leadership attributes, and we've seen over time Dee could talk about doing this in the Reagan White House of tracking leadership traits. We've seen they've been so critical, right? And so important, but if Biden's leading in these leadership attributes, why is it such a close race, or feels so close and so uncertain at this point as to what's going to happen?
Well, our coverage is always, always helps us learn about these kind of questions, these kind of conversations. I think it's an exciting time, and I think there's a lot of passion behind Trump, and there's a lot of passion behind Biden as well. Why does Biden have the leadership qualities? I think in these polls, I think it's a lot to do with how the media covers Trump and what Trump puts out in front of the media. Sometimes that content can be, questionable. Sometimes it can be, hard to wrangle, hard to verify certain ways. So, we do our very best to make sure we do that, make sure we give a very clear coverage and clear perspective on everything that's coming out of the White House. So, Trump is a master at manipulation of the media. You see what he's doing today with the 60 Minutes interview, and he's getting that out first, whether that's prudent or not, or whether that's part of what the tradition has been or not. He doesn't really care. He's going to put his message out there first and foremost. So those are the things as journalists that we're working on. Those are the things as journalists that we're making sure to cover in a fair and balanced way. And so that inevitably, rubs off on the consumer, rubs off on the listener, and how they react to both candidates. So it's an exciting time, and we see from our data for our own, news organization that the engagement people is through the roof. So we're really excited to be in that spot to help people analyze, to help people understand, and provide facts when it's not always easy to find the facts.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that. Joel, let me ask you this. Are we going to see a debate tonight? Is it going to happen? And is it going to have any influence on these leadership traits or the ballot?
I don't think it'll have much influence on it. These two guys are who they are. They're both pushing towards 80. I don't think it's going to really, change many people's minds. I do think there will be a debate tonight. I think we would have heard by now if it wasn't going to happen. So I think it's full steam ahead on that. It should be very interesting to see how the mute button works.
Yeah,
that is going to be something, and that could, I wouldn't totally shock me to see, Trump possibly storm off and just say, this is ridiculous, I'm not doing it. Who knows? He's big on theater. Could happen.
Yeah. I'm curious, Mitchell, what's your take on what's driving with these leadership traits you've been looking at, and you look at the movement toward, we've got some questions that have come in from our audience. Is this drive, at least on a national level, that seems to be happening? Is it toward Biden? Is it about COVID? Is it about the economy? Is it about exhaustion with the whole process? Is it about Trump's behavior, Supreme Court? probably all of the above, but any sense as to what's behind when we look at this sense of who these two guys are and the passion behind the vote, yet there is clearly some movement, at least nationally, toward Biden?
Well, I think for Trump, obviously, he pushes hard on the economy, and that is the leadership quality that, and the idea of getting things done is the one that's going to keep coming up for him over and over again. It's been interesting to see both data and just anecdotal things that I've read and seen related to Biden. It's much more of a mixed bag, I think, with Biden. I think the exhaustion and the fatigue of the news cycle, of what's happening to people personally, I think that has taken a big toll, obviously, on a lot of people. And I think that in a way that helps Biden, because people are just tired of being tired, as they say, right? And so I saw an interesting interview the other day that CNN did. They did a really nice feature on this African-American woman in Michigan who was trying to get out the vote because she was, worried that around Detroit and Wayne County, which had like 75,000 fewer voters on the Democratic side in 2016 than they had in the previous election with Barack Obama. And that was the second Obama one. It was even higher, of course, in the first one. She was out, trying to get people motivated to vote. And she was asked specific to this question, are you voting for Biden or are you voting against Trump? And her answer, I thought, was interesting because it probably reflects a lot of people. She said, I'm on the Democratic side. She said, I'm voting probably 80% against Trump and about 20% for Biden. And she indicated her support wasn't like a huge amount of energy for Biden. She just felt that that's what she needed to do. So I do think that, this exhaustion, the fatigue does help Biden. And also related to the coronavirus, obviously, he and the president have very different approaches to that. So that plays really to both of their bases in different ways, obviously.
Well, let's take a moment to look at the issue agenda, and then we want to spend our last 15, 20 minutes talking about business implications on a Biden win, a Trump win, and some of the realities associated with it with all of us here on the call today from a variety of sectors. We want to understand that. So you've got a poll up there. Some of you have been doing it. I've got about 10 more seconds here, and we'll get as many of you who want to answer this. You can pick as many as you want in terms of which issues do you think are going to be most critical to driving the ballot on election day. And so about 10 more seconds, and we'll grab this to see what you're seeing and what you're feeling. And we're going to share with you what we saw most recently among the general public and the voters. So go ahead and close that out in 3, 2, 1, boom. Okay. Aaron, let's talk through what we're seeing in the issue agenda here. Our group feels like it's going to be the response to the pandemic and the economy in that top tier.
So that is correct. The data that I'm showing here has been really consistent since we started tracking it a couple of months ago, probably at the end of the summer, where overall the biggest impact on vote is the economy, but very close behind is healthcare and the government response to the coronavirus, with a break of Trump voters being much more impacted by the state of the economy and Biden voters being much more impacted by healthcare and government response to the coronavirus. The one kind of point of differentiation is that fourth one down, where Trump voters, it's not about government response to coronavirus, but they feel a stronger need to return to normal after the coronavirus, which, President Trump's administration takes the position that it's time to do that. And I think the Democrats take an opposite position. And I think that's why you see the split there on the wording of, response to COVID-19. So that's kind of overview. We pulled some more data from Ipsos that we thought was interesting. So only a quarter of Americans think that the country is headed in the right direction, and only half of Republicans too. So those aren't great numbers for anybody. And then when they asked people to agree or disagree with the statement, "We are in a battle for the soul of our nation," which feels a little dramatic, yet 3/4 of Americans agree. and it's equal among partisans.
It's something we all agree on, Aaron.
I know, right? Independents fall back a little bit, but partisans feel like this is the real deal, right? This is really the most important election of our lifetime. We wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the issues because if Biden wins and a Biden administration takes control, especially if they have control of the Senate, it doesn't become a Democrat policy versus Republican policy. The truth is that the Democrats are factioned into a more moderate wing of the party, which I think it's fair to say Joe Biden belongs to traditionally, and a more progressive wing of the party that, a Sanders presidency might have embraced. So we took 4 issues and we broke those issues down into kind of generally accepted positions for progressive left, more moderate left, and then a conservative point of view as well. And they go across the page: progressive, moderate Democrat, or more moderate liberal and conservative. And so on jobs in the economy, what you see is that among the total, and the total is that dashed line that goes across them, you have a plurality of people favoring the conservative point of view, but that's because we split the liberal point of view into 2. And so together, the more progressive and the more moderate view towards jobs, which involves a heavy federal hand in creating jobs, is where the majority of the country is. And so the real question, and this will be a theme as we go throughout these topics, is will they be able to agree? Will the Democratic Party be able to agree? Or is a strong plurality from the right going to be enough to kind of nudge these 2 groups to a place where they can't agree and we end up with gridlock? So this was on jobs in the economy. Healthcare is actually the one place where the Biden campaign's point of view and that moderate Democrat position was largely taken from his campaign platform. The idea that we need to keep the Affordable Care Act and build on it. That is where the plurality of Americans are. Now, there's some pretty stark party differences here, but the question sort of remains: is can the Democrats get enough support within their own party to do that, or will they be nudged towards single-payer healthcare and ultimately kind of lose out on some of those moderate folks and not be able to make progress? On taxes, same thing. You've got kind of a starker split between the conservative point of view and the more progressive point of view, progressive being a wealth tax and really high marginal tax rates. The conservative point of view being kind of keeping the Trump tax cuts the way they are. And sort of the middle that we took from Biden's platform really ends up being kind of technical. And I think that's why it appeals to fewer Americans. And then finally, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about cultural forces, this idea of racial equality that's been a more frequently talked about topic in the last couple of months. So on the progressive side, you've got the anti-racist theory. On the conservative side, you have an idea of having racially blind equality of opportunity. And then in the middle, you've got a statement that really sort of reflects traditional affirmative action policies. And this is where the conservative point of view actually has the most support among Americans overall, and specifically among independents. And so I think this is going to be something that in a Biden administration, in a Trump administration, he's made it very clear how he's going to handle that. In a Biden administration, I think there are a lot of questions as to what happens here. And then cultural forces, we looked at 3. So the first one was about America's individualistic framework, or kind of the pull between individualism and collectivism. And here we're seeing some evidence of patterns that have been noted elsewhere in polls and other literature, that Americans are moving more and more toward collectivism. So here we've got only 44% of Americans saying that it's clear that the framework doesn't work for the modern era. That doesn't mean 56% disagree with that. You only have 23% who disagree, and you've got a third that kind of don't know. But among Republicans, 47% agree that the individualistic framework of America doesn't work anymore. That's pretty massive and has implications about what comes next. And then the other two we asked had more to do with identity politics and racial issues. So here, this was interesting to us that the concept of identity politics, as people know it from the buzzword, people see that as driving us apart. It's not bringing the unity that people feel we need. 58% of people, including 56% of Democrats, feel like that's the wrong thing to be focusing on at this moment. And then again, on the racial equity piece, how we get to a truly racially equal society. The majority of Americans believe that activists have become too focused on race to really make progress on the idea of a truly racially equal society. Slightly less than half of Democrats, but still a pretty solid number at 43%. By far the opinion of Republicans, and you get a little bit over half of independents as well on that. So Mari, I know we had a couple of questions we wanted to ask the panel on those topics.
Yeah, you bet. So let me start with you. Start with you, Joel. What do you think about this? Assuming a Biden administration, when it comes to this, on a lot of these issues, you have a more progressive and liberal point of view, and then that plurality conservative. To Aaron's question, do you see them being able to agree, or do you see it being gridlocked with the plurality on the conservative side as to how they solve some of these issues under a Biden administration?
It seems that they're going to still struggle mightily to agree, in my opinion. I don't think that, as we've seen with Trump and many administrations in the past, the platforms that they run their campaigns on rarely are able to get an awful lot of that accomplished. I think we would see, more gridlock as we go forward would be my best guess. Interestingly, in having some conversations with some people I know at Morgan Stanley and some people I know at Merrill Lynch, that kind of some divided feelings. The Morgan Stanley people felt that from an economic standpoint, the Biden victory had already been factored in, and the stock market will mostly brush it off. Whereas the Merrill people felt that there could be a precipitous drop if Biden wins the election. So it's the business implications are huge for this one if the Merrill Lynch people are correct.
Craig Mitchell, any reaction to you on that interplay and the interfighting between the more progressive and maybe the Biden point of view from his platform on those issues if we have a Biden administration?
Well, I think up to this point, Biden has been able to, for the most part, hold together that kind of centrist point of view within the party. But if he is elected, and if the Democrats take the Senate maybe at a 50 or a 51-49, it'll be super tight if they actually do that, then he is going to come under huge amount of pressure from the far left side of the party. And so there you're going to, in some respects, you may see some of the dynamics that are taking place within the Republican Party, within the Democrats. What you saw, a few years ago with the Republicans and the Tea Party.
Yeah.
And then you got to the point where basically the whole party was all in with Trump or not. I think the Democrats traditionally, it's kind of like, as they say, it's like a rodeo with cats. They're all trying to go in different directions. Pelosi, the House Speaker, has held things together pretty well, considering the diversity within the party. But I think they're going to feel a real lean. You're seeing that on issues like packing the court, which used to very rarely even come up as a topic, and it was dismissed as something that that Biden really didn't like. But then today he actually felt he had an issue, a statement saying that he would create a commission. So those are the kind of things that you're going to see, and that's going to make it, I think, to Joel's point, seeing it on a daily basis, the gridlock here, I just don't see how you escape forward.
Do either three of you want to jump on this real quickly? We didn't show our trust numbers. They're low in terms of institution. They have been, and they're just getting lower. So if you got low trust, and then you've got this same dynamic we did show of maybe individualism off, but collectivism maybe needs to be more critical to the way we approach. What does collectivism look like in an era when institutional trust is so low? Any three of you want to jump on that one?
Boy, that's a really tough question because, thinking about collectivism, for example, at the outset of the pandemic, there were, I'm sure you had these discussions or saw it in polling where people wondered, oh, well, maybe if the nation is facing a major issue, literally once in a lifetime issue, that might soften things and come together. And what have we seen? We have seen absolutely the opposite. It has ripped the country apart. So,
well, and what's really interesting on that, Mitch, I just want to point out, in the first 3 months, it did that. We actually had the majority of Americans saying that we're bringing us closer together. The moment the discussions around opening started, it all changed. It all became the blame game of different, and then now we've just been consistent. Most everyone thinks we're just getting further and further apart.
Right. And I think each side, points to, rightly or wrongly, makes a caricature out of the far left or the right of either party. And that makes it very, very hard to govern. By all intents and purposes, Biden is a guy who, as they've said, has been in public office for 47 years. He is the classic centrist, but you can see how the Republicans have tried to paint him as captive of AOC and of the left. So it just, and the left does the same thing with the right. So it just makes it very, very difficult to govern in these times.
Craig, any take on that?
Well, I think for us, it's incredible to kind of see that happen through our coverage. It's incredible to see how the one of the biggest stories for us is school openings and closings, and kind of the hand wringing that goes on from a county to county basis. So when you talk about what's dividing the country and all the sentiments and all the expectations that people have, it all comes from the top down. So every single municipality, every single county is trying to figure out how to reopen, how to do it safely, how to do it, quickly. And you see Trump, he's making his case that has to happen immediately, and so through the coverage and through our news gathering, we see exactly what Mitchell's talking about, and what you're suggesting too is, to continue on through that, whether that's going to be through a Biden administration or through a Trump administration, we'll find out, but it doesn't seem like it's going to go away. We still have to grapple with that on November 4th, on December 4th. How are we reopening schools? How are we keeping people safe? How are businesses reopening? How are we going to answer those tough questions?
Really interesting. And you do feel, you take that and combined with this is a fight for the soul of the country, individualism not working, collectivism, people agreeing across the board, but yet systemically, we don't have things that are enabling that. We want to get to the last here, 10, 15 minutes, talking about, okay, so what does this mean for business? We have a wide array of folks on with us today from all sorts of sectors. I put out a poll question. We got most of you in. If you want to answer that, you got about 5 more seconds. I wanted to just say, from your take, and this isn't being attributed to anyone, so just want to see what you think. Is this, is a Biden win or a Trump win better for your company and your industry? So we'll go just a few more seconds and take a look, and then we want to show you some data and then really ask some questions about this. And I encourage you to also put in some more questions if you like as we get through this. So I'm going to close this out in 3, 2, 1. All right. Now let's share this out. Okay, so 57%, so majority, but not by a huge amount, believe that a Biden victory is better for the company and the industry. And then 43%. It's kind of split, but leaning toward the Biden side. Aaron, let's go through the data and look at what are some of the things that we're seeing, and then we want to set up some discussions.
Sure. So we, again, from the Ipsos data that was released earlier this week, I think, we pulled this slide as kind of a summary of what potential outcomes look like for 2020. And I think we've covered a lot of them in our discussion already, but they're putting kind of a 1 in 4 chance that Trump wins. It would be narrow. Republicans would hold the Senate in that scenario. And that looks like what it's looked like for better or worse. There's about a 50% chance they're giving that Biden wins narrowly, but the Democrats don't take the Senate. And that is a situation that just becomes classic Washington gridlock. So Biden and his party have an agenda. The House can push stuff forward, but the Senate becomes a pretty substantial block and nothing happens. And then there's a 1 in 4 chance that Biden wins in a blue wave that sweeps up the Senate. And that would most likely lead to some pretty bold progressive changes in our government and our focus. So we did an analysis in terms of, we thought through, okay, what do businesses, what do they need? What are they looking for? And the 2 things we came up with were favorable economic policies, policies that made sense for their business or helped their business. And then really certainty is what a lot of businesses, and particularly the stock market, kind of ebbs and flows with. Just, we know what to plan for. And so on those 2 dimensions, we looked at a variety of things, and we plotted the different candidates. And so Trump ends up in the upper left-hand corner, where the policies that he would advocate for are more pro-business at an economic level, but certainty is about as negative as you can get. So I just put up the different components that we thought through when figuring out where to put Trump, and I'll go through this, some similar ones for Biden. And I just want to preface this by saying we had a lot of internal debate over where you could plot these points. And I think the idea isn't that, this is where staff turnover belongs, or this is where deregulation belongs, but these are the types of things that businesses should be thinking through now while there's a little bit of planning time left. Of what do we need? How much does this particular item matter for our business, and what does it give us? So, for Trump, less certainty and things that are bad for business. Pretty much everything the president does with Twitter, the fact that he's a loose cannon, particularly on Twitter. There have been a number of times where he's announced a policy through social media, and then his administration doesn't follow through, or he backtracks it later through official channels. That creates a lot of uncertainty for business. That's not great. The uncertainty that comes with a likely second impeachment, which, if the Democrats retain the House, feels very likely if he wins for one reason or another. But in terms of pro-business policies, he's promised, he has demonstrated and promised to continue deregulation, same with low corporate tax rates. And then there are a couple smaller things that are tucked in some of the acts that have been passed recently. So for example, there's a payroll tax holiday for employers. Part of his campaign has said that he will forgive that holiday. Instead of being a holiday, it's just forgiven. Things like that businesses can count on extra money in the door in these kind of volatile times. Then we put Joe Biden sort of exactly opposite. There is far more certainty for business with a Joe Biden presidency. You know what you're getting for the most part. But he has advocated a number of policies that are less favorable toward business. So here we've got traditional politician was kind of the best way we could sum up a lot of it, although I liked the term that was used earlier about he's your classic centrist. He's got a more moderate position on trade, on immigration. He will bring more stability, most likely, to international relations. The one place where there's a lot, I would say a high degree of uncertainty, we've already touched on, which is how strong will the progressive wing of his party be in terms of pressure on him to do things. That's kind of an unknown. But things that we know is that there would be increased regulation on the environment, on hiring practices, on things like that. He has come out very openly and aggressively as pro-union. He supports a $15 minimum wage. He supports corporate tax increase. So what we're seeing is the real trade-off here is business economic policies and certainty. And like everything else in this election, once you figure out which one of those is more important to you, it really becomes clear quickly which candidate you prefer. And then when we were walking through all of this, there was another issue that didn't really fit on this plot that we wanted to talk through. And this, I'm going to kick this question to the panel when I'm done here. But there are a number of things that are on Biden's platform that would be described as economically less favorable for business, right? Just in terms of a balance sheet. $15 minimum wage, being pro-union, some different things about how healthcare reform would happen. And a lot of those are things that companies are currently doing and pledging to do voluntarily under this concept of stakeholder capitalism. And so the question we came up with is, in the Trump era, feels like stakeholder capitalism, that there's a push for it, a desire for it, that it adds to brands and to their values. But in a Biden administration, where a lot of these current voluntary actions become mandated or regulated, how does that then become a benefit to the brands and companies who are currently doing it voluntarily? What does it look like if they can no longer compete on being a good actor through these specific things? Do they find new kind of good actor things, or does that whole piece of competition between brands fall apart? So, Mari, I don't know if you want to have the group.
Yeah, let's jump right in. Joel, you want to take that one?
I'll let Mitchell start off with that one.
Okay, Mitchell, go. What do you think in terms of this, the differentiation toward trying to do things for different stakeholders? What does that look like in terms of differentiation under a Biden administration if some of those things start happening by government mandate as opposed to companies taking those steps?
I think you're going to get pushback, a lot of pushback within the corporate world, because there really has been, as you pointed out, a real sea change in a lot of companies undertaking these things on their own, seeing them as good long-term business decisions that, you know, not only are they quote unquote the right thing to do, but they also help the business over the long term. And I think if you start to see, you know, this exuberance, for example, if the Democrats do blow out the doors on this election, that there's a danger there for them overstepping. And I think the veteran lawmakers here on the Hill understand that, and that's why you've seen people like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi kind of hold part of her wing back when they want to do a variety of things that she knows are going to upset things in terms of the capitalism apple cart. But you've also got to remember too, as we move forward, I was just thinking of this. I mean, not only are the two presidential candidates older, but the leadership on the Democratic side is very old. And so at some point, there's going to have to be a transition. I mean, you have Speaker Pelosi is 80, the majority leader is 81. You just have a lot of people up here who have been here a long time, and there is this push on the Hill, you can feel it, that at times bubbles up. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see, you know, if the Democrats have some success in this election, how they handle that.
Well, to me,
go ahead, Joe, please.
Yeah, you know, a lot of these subjects have come up before. You know, corporate tax increase is really going to shape big business. I think we could see a lot of businesses continue to move more operations overseas. A $15 minimum wage sounds good on the campaign trail, but the reality is it makes a heck of a lot of sense in places like Washington, D.C. or Seattle, Washington. But when you go to Lincoln, Nebraska, or down to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. Pro-union sounds good, but so few people really are in unions now comparatively. I don't know that means as much as it used to. And in terms of healthcare, we've seen how sluggish that is, even in the Obama administration, of getting that to move forward. So, you know, once again, I think we'd see that a lot of this didn't really happen, but I think it would make a lot of companies nervous, and you could see a downturn in the economy if the Democrats take it too far. And I believe that's somewhat of what Mitchell's point was trying to make as well.
Yeah, a lot of these dynamics, we really appreciate that. Real lightning round, one last quick thing. One of the biggest things from a business planning perspective is going to be able to look at what to anticipate in terms of when this is going to be decided, and how to be able, what to be looking for on election night, and so forth. What is anything that you can share with us around what business leaders around the country, what should we be looking at? What should we be expecting from a timing perspective? And is this likely to be solved in the courts, or do you think it'll be solved within the first week or two coming out? I realize it's impossible to know for sure, but what are some of the signs that maybe all of us here on this call today should be looking for on election day, and then election night, and the days after?
Well, I think
my perspective is just real quickly, and then Mitchell, you know, barring a landslide for Biden, it's hard to imagine that this would certainly not take at least a month. Somebody mentioned December 4th earlier. I think that was one of you all, or was Mitchell. And it seems parts of this, parts of the decision making on how it all shook out would be into the courts. That'd be my take.
Anything different, Mitchell, Craig?
No, I agree. I mean, if we see early in the evening of election night where there's some uncertainty about whether Trump can get some of these key states, and then it does turn out to be a big blue wave, then things will probably move fairly quickly. If as I mentioned earlier, much closer. And to Joel's point, I agree. I think it would take at least a month to sort it all out with all the early voting and mail-in voting issues. And then at the same time, I think you got to wonder how the market's going to react, not only to that, but because of that, then there's going to be uncertainty about what's going to happen with this $2 trillion coronavirus relief package. And that, you've seen the market kind of wobble back and forth on that. And there's a ton of uncertainty here about what would happen in a lame duck, as all these issues are still, as we still try to sort them all out through the courts or wherever.
Yeah, that's a really great point. You get a Biden win, you still have the next few months, or the next month and a half there period of lame duck presidency. What's going to happen in there?
Yep.
Okay, we're at time. We can keep going for a long time. Thank you so much, Dee. Let me turn it back to you.
First, Craig, Mitchell, and Joel, thank you so much for your time and for your insights. Very, very helpful. You guys are right in the middle of it all, and appreciate you taking the time to share with our clients. And secondly, our clients, without you, none of this would be possible. We're so grateful for you and for your support of this series and for the work that we do. Thank you. And just a reminder, our next roundtable is going to be November 6th on Friday, not a Thursday, but a Friday, election week. It'll be our first look at the results of the election. We do an election night polling. We'll be sharing that with you all in our roundtable on November 6th. So see you all then. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for having us part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.